When Derrida was pronouncing the birth of deconstruction, he got a lot of criticism. The criticism was mostly that his analysis was unintelligible, didn't make sense, didn't lead to any conclusion, any one conclusion, and it didn't tell you any more about the story than before you read it. Um, but that was part of his idea, was that there can be more than one meaning. So all of the people who were criticizing him were the structuralists who were used to studying a work for years, and then here Derrida pops in, does a brief, well, not a brief, because his analyses would be pages, 50, 60 pages of a particular book. Um, but he pops in and writes something about it that gets credit, whereas they've worked all their lives and careers for one particular book, and they just didn't like that. Some thought that he completely just disregarded the past. In order to look forward, he didn't even worry about what had come before him and didn't pay proper reverential value to it. They resented his dismantling of traditional modes of thought. We weren't supposed to be thinking in binaries or what is not there. We're supposed to be seeing what's there in front of us. And they just felt like this would just lead to chaos. But it didn't. It didn't destroy Western society because we have a new way of looking at things. So what do we do when we deconstruct? We highlight the contradictions within a text. Again, that's first and foremost. Is there things that we somewhat understand in the text? I mean, just watching an episode, are there times when something comes up and you're just like, I don't quite get it? There's usually some kind of internal problem there, and sometimes it's intentional, sometimes not, but that's what you have to look at and question why. It goes beyond traditional thought, fosters independent thought, because the sky's the limit. You can look at it and work with it the way that best suits you. So thus we can have a variety of interpretations. In theory, if I ask each of you to write me what is the meaning of the wasp and the unicorn and the wasp, I could conceivably get 30 completely different meanings and interpretations, because you all bring something different to the table and have different ideas, which is the diversity of ideas and meanings. So when you start speaking, we then have discussion and follow-up. Then we start talking about how our different views come together. Then we can start seeing things that others didn't. And that's really what you're already doing with coming to classes. Coming and taking a class like this, what you're doing is taking information that I have for you, that I've studied, and you can then co-opt it. You can start using some of that, and it'll bring you new ideas. When you go out and you read, you watch episodes, you think about things, you're going to sometimes see things a little differently now. You're going to pick up on things. You're going to look at intertext, even though, again, you won't sit there and say, well, I'm going to intertext everything now. Just the idea that you've been exposed to it, you're going to see it. You're going to say, oh, that reminds me of this. And that's the intertext. And often then students have come back and told me, yeah, I still think of you when I see this or do this, because I always think of intertext now, or deconstruction, or different things. So it will have a meaning, a diversity in your ideas and meanings when you watch things, look at things now. So how do we deconstruct a text? So again, pick a text. And again, that can be anything from a song, a poem, a novel, a painting, a sculpture. You can even deconstruct a street sign. You can do a speech, or a TV episode. As you read, you need to look for binary opposites. So we need to look at, what are binaries? Binaries is a structuralist idea, which originally means that language has value or meaning because we measure it against what it is not. So, for example, if I say I'm fat, and I am, that means that not only do I have an excess of pounds, but at the same time, you also can read things into it. You know that I'm not skinny. You know that I probably don't exercise. You probably could figure out whether I'm very active or lazy. So there's certain things that come when we say one thing, we have other meanings against it, things that it's not. If someone says, yes, I'm extremely tall, we know that they're not short. But if someone were to say, well, I'm average height, what are they measuring that against? So normally we look at the binary opposites. Someone says it's up, then we know that it's not down. We don't need to go to if I say, I'm up on the third floor, we don't need to go down and start rooting around the lower floors because we know we have to go up. So again, we always define things also by what they are not. With this categorization, we also tend to associate things as positive or negative. So again, if you say, I'm tall, then you're telling someone I'm not short. And so that means that you start associating tall with good because things that you do, things that you are is good, and then negative would be short. If you say, and even think about this not so much in how we favor it, but think about how we say the binary opposites. We usually say up and down, heaven, hell, in and out, what else? Black and white. We have male, female. Generally speaking, the first term used is called a privileged term because that's the term that we think of as positive, and the opposite of it is the negative aspect. And so again, for male and female, most people say that even if you're female, because historically that's what has happened in the Western society with patriarchy, that the males were in charge, so the males were the positive aspect. The females were not males, and so that had a less positive impact. Derrida argued that these oppositions were arbitrary and inherently unstable. When we post a label, and this is labeling basically, if we say it's positive or negative, if we label something, that doesn't mean that we can then just say this is the meaning, because those labels can break down. He rejects much of the assumptions of structuralism, also the binary opposition. But what is really odd about it, I realized when I was speaking this, I realized I misspelled the word privilege. And I've given this lecture 3 times now, and no one's told me I had a typo in it, because I just start talking about it and I don't see the words behind me as I'm teaching in the classroom. But for him, what is so odd, and this is an internal contradiction as well, he argues that binaries are arbitrary, unstable, we can't trust them. If we label things, the labels can change. But at the same time, in order to do deconstruction, you have to set up binaries. So he's constantly using binaries, but at the same time, he says you can't trust them. And so this is an important aspect to Derrida that a lot of people didn't get, is that this was meant to be somewhat, I won't say frivolous, but you have to have a little dose of humor in doing deconstruction. Because even the things that he's giving to you as deconstruction, they would fall apart as well, because he says, don't use binaries, binaries are bad, and he uses binaries. It's like, don't label things, labels are bad, but he labels things. So again, he does these things, and then people are saying, this is why we think he's going to lead us to chaos. But what he's saying is that I'm showing you in my words and actions the problems that exist, and I'm putting it into action. And so we now have the binary set up. So again, I'm going to walk you through these steps, and then we're going to do a couple of examples.